So we are talking about um, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're talking about specific topics. And it's really hard to talk about discrimination and racism because why? Because we are afraid of offending people. Maybe we have an unpopular view or an opposing view. So as a result, maybe we don't speak up because of offending people. Potentially lack of acceptance from of your views, or your lack of acceptance from other people's views. Interesting, and I just ran across this early this morning. According to the Pew Research Center, all of us, every single one of us, doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are, we have unconscious, implicit, hidden, racial, as well as other types of biases and stereotypes. So if we are going to explore diversity, equity, inclusion, we need to explore these unconscious and hidden biases that come up. So joining me, I am Susan Robertson. I am the co-founder and CEO of Lindsay's Conscious Business. I have my sister and business partner, Cynthia Medaglia, who joined our company a couple of years ago, and Tommy English, who I've adored for many years. We worked together as she hired me to help with her team in cultural transformation and some coaching as well with her team. And we're actually going to be talking about that. So I'm happy to have them here today. So the two main topics, besides unconscious bias, because unconscious bias underlies things, underlies a lot of this stuff. The two things that we really want to focus on today, and we don't have enough time to focus on the depth we'd like to, is seeing color or not seeing color, and the importance of acknowledging and experiencing and valuing distinction and differences, and tokenism, and being the only one. And Cindy, Tommy, and I had some fun talking about what it's been like to be the only one of fill in the blank. And one of the things that all three of us believe is that if we really want to have diversity, equity, inclusion, it starts with awareness about what's needed. So in that way, you must see distinction. You must see color. And I can see some people are saying hello to each other. Thank you very much. We love the chat. And if you have any questions along the way, please put them in there. Feel free to have the chat conversations. We'll be monitoring it and be able to answer some of the questions. But anyway, DEI starts with understanding about seeing the distinction, about what's there and not there. And then it has to be in terms of numbers, really. Do we really have a diverse team? And then the next thing it goes to is, are we giving access, real access and equity to everyone involved? And when you look at it, you can have diversity and not have access and not have fairness. And that could be because of unconscious bias and things that we don't even realize that we're doing that discriminates other people. And then you have to make a focused effort to really create inclusion and belonging. And if we have enough time today, Tommy and I are going to share a fun story about inclusion and belonging when I was working with her team. I guess it was probably 10 years ago. The other thing is we're going to issue a call to action in terms of each of you taking a look at and asking yourself, do I have an unconscious bias? But again, it starts with awareness. It requires bravery to be able to speak up and address things where there's social injustice. And one of you asked about allyship, and that's that advocation. And so our call to action is that we're offering some help and support to help you start these more difficult conversations, because in order to have diversity, equity, inclusion, we must talk about these things. And these are not easy things to talk about. And then how do you talk about it fairly? And again, if you have any notes or if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. So enough of a preamble, except actually I have one more. It's important that we see distinction, and we actually see distinction. So it really is a misnomer when we say we don't see color, right? Because that's about distinction. We describe people: tall, short, smart, serious, smart, or intellectual, creative, computer geek. We are always looking at distinction. It's whether we really value that distinction, or do we inadvertently discriminate against it, or do we actively discriminate against that distinction that we see? We don't think of that. I'm not going to hire somebody that's slightly overweight unless you think of hiring a fitness person. Then you might discriminate against somebody that might be larger than what you would want. So we're going to really talk about that. Or if you have a belief system about a particular group of people because of what you've seen in the media, and suddenly you see that and you say, no, I'm going to be fair, I'm going to be fair, but you have an unconscious bias that you don't even realize that you've ruled them out. And then you find something to rule them out. So the first question I want to ask, and I'm going to ask Tommy first, and then I'm going to go to Cindy, is, Tommy, we were talking about what should we title our next one, Seeing Color, Not Seeing Color. And Cindy said, and I'm going to give Cindy the opportunity to share. Cindy said, I don't see color. And I've always strived not to see color. And Tommy, you had a bit of a reaction to that. So can you share what your reaction was and why you had that reaction?
Thank you. Hi, Sue. Hi, Cindy. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. And yes, I did have a reaction when Cindy said that. And it's because I've had that reaction before. And when I've heard leaders say, I don't see color. And I've challenged leaders before to say, but you need to see color. Being a Black woman, having been in leadership for 30 years and being at the table and being the only Black woman and sometimes the only Black person, immediately I see color. And having leaders, having worked with multitude of leaders, I have challenged them to also see color, not so that we can treat each other different, but so that we can have better perspectives about where each of us are coming from, our unique experiences, our unique backgrounds, and understanding how we create a diverse and inclusive environment. So I've challenged leaders, I've challenged people that report to me, and I've challenged myself to see color so that I can become a better leader. And I do have a couple of examples on that when we get to that, on what that challenge looked like.
So I have one more question to follow up with that. So you had a physical, emotional reaction because on the inside, what we don't normally talk about, when you heard somebody say, and in this particular conversation, Cindy say, I don't see color. What did that mean to you as a Black woman in business? And just, if you will, for your race, when you guys hear that, what does that actually mean to you?
Because we're a minority, like many minorities, when you say you don't see color, it means you don't see me, right? If I say I don't see color, I don't see you. I don't see Cindy. And being a minority at the table already, I'm wondering how do I fit in because I'm the only one of me, or there are very few of me. I need to know that you see me. And I know that when Cindy said that, she didn't mean that she didn't see me. And I've known a lot of great leaders who didn't mean that, you don't matter or diversity doesn't matter. But when you say that, I don't know if unconsciously you're telling yourself that. And I know Cindy wasn't doing that.
Mhm.
But do you see me?
Yeah, and that's because you know Cindy, and we're going to talk about the importance of knowing people. And thank you, Deborah. Yeah, colorblind. When we say we're colorblind, it can be offensive because, being a woman, being a Black woman, being an Asian woman, and I shared with you all this morning, a friend of mine who's an Asian woman she actually wrote a post about what it's like to be Asian right now
Mhm.
and that distinction in our culture. So Cindy, the other side of it, when you said you didn't see color, what did you mean as a and I don't think of you as saying, what did I mean not seeing color as a white person? But you know, you are a white person who said, I don't see color.
Exactly. I mean, I think about where we came from, right? How we were brought up. We had an almost stepfather who was a bigot, and he was a part of our lives at our very formidable years, where it was not uncommon to hear him drop the N word regularly. In fact, he used to call us Irish McKids, and I just knew even at a young age, that when you label people, it's out of fear or out of hatred. And that was not the way I wanted to be. So when you and I grew up and we went to high school together, we attended an all girls Catholic high school that was rich in diversity. I mean, we were in downtown Cleveland, and every walk of life, except for male, was there. Every, race, ethnicity, fat, tall, smart, dope heads. I mean, we had them all, right? And what I learned through this is that yes, I see color, but I see beyond color. And I've worked really hard at seeing beyond color, because at the end of the day, we're all human. We're all individuals. We all have a purpose. We all have a uniqueness. We all have gifts. And so I don't want to discount when I say I don't see color. I say it because I'm really intentional to not discriminate. I'm really intentional to be sure that I'm including everyone, whether they want to be included or not. That give equal access, and just be fair.
And so to follow up on that point, as a leader, you primarily had a Latina group, and at one point, yeah, and you had to manage shifts, right? And at one point, you were going in thinking not seeing color meant fairness and giving equal access to everybody based on skill, capability, their growth desires, and all of that. And then you had to hire for distinction, right? And what was that like when you had to hire for distinction for specific skills? And then that meant some people were left behind, despite the fact they had more seniority and more tenure and maybe even more skill.
Right. So it was a business decision that was made, that it was better if we had Spanish speaking customer relations specialists that could relate and be able to communicate clearly our various policies, payment plans, et cetera. And so we did a mass hiring of folks that spoke Spanish. And I remember, it was several individuals, and the work group that they joined were very tenured, not Latina, but every other ethnicity that you can imagine. We had Black, we had white, we had young, we had old, and the existing workforce was kind of, put out. What do you mean they get to work the primary shift of 7 a.m. to 3 p.m.? I've been here for the last 15 years trying to get that shift. And it's like, well, do you speak Spanish? Because we need the talent to speak Spanish from 7 a.m. to 3:30. I'm sorry that you're working, 9 to 5:30. So that really forced me to recognize that, this is, it's almost uncomfortable to say it, right? For me, that yes, the majority of them were a different color. In fact, my tenured staff was shocked when we hired 2 males. One was an African-American and one was an Irish boy. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, that we had diversity within our Spanish-speaking group. So it was very difficult to try to integrate that group initially, because the tenured folks were very obstinate, didn't want any part of this. And it took a little time in order to integrate that group.
Thanks, Cindy. And Tommy, you had almost like an opposite situation. And again, we'll talk about the team session I did with yours, where your team, based on the roles that they are, that were offered, and where you're located, where you were located at that time, that lended itself to primarily hiring Black women. And so you had to do something different. So can you talk about that?
Yes, and that was an opportunity for me to step outside of my team and look at it and say, okay, what do I see? And as leaders, I think that's important, that we become very aware, and not by deliberate intent. I did have primarily all African-American women on my team. Um, and it became a concern for me for two reasons. Number one, we already struggle to be taken seriously as Black women, to be at the table. We struggle with the labels of being emotional, of being not assertive, but being aggressive. And then that ugly statement always comes up as when we show our passion, an angry Black woman. And so that was a concern, was will we be taken seriously at the table? And then my second concern was when we don't diversify and we don't have diversity within our team, are we creating an inclusive environment? Are we thinking differently? Are we thinking about the things that we should be thinking about when it comes to inclusion or when it comes to equity? And so from that perspective, I knew that I needed to be very deliberate and very intentional in how I work with recruiting, and how I look for candidates, right? And I've had leaders, and I said it too, I'm going to hire the best person for the job. But you can hire the best person for the job and also make sure that your recruiting person is getting you a diverse slate of people to look at, right? And sometimes it takes more time.
Mhm.
It takes more time. And in business, we want to hurry up and get things done. But when you want to create an environment of diversity and equity and inclusion, then you will take the time to make sure that you're creating that team that people can look at and say, okay, I see that there is an inclusive environment. I see that there is an effort to bring in people who look like me. If with at that time, my staff was 55% African American, 35% Hispanic. And so it took me more time, but I was very deliberate in hiring the best people for the job, but also making sure that we looked at diversifying our team.
Yeah. And you both said something that's really important is that being intentional about fairness, being intentional about access, and then being intentional that when there was positions that are open, that like you just said, Tommy, making sure you had a diverse slate to begin with, you know, because we have a tendency then to hire, and we're not as intentional, although I know HR teams are now becoming much more intentional about making sure we have a diverse slate. And one of the groups we haven't talked about, and I don't want to suggest that we're excluding them because we use the word color, is the LGBTQ group. We have to be intentional. It's about people of all flavors, all colors.
Mhm.
and and it's true, and I'd like for you guys to give me your perspective on this. It's true that there is a Black culture, there is a white culture, there is a Latina culture, there's an Italian culture, there's a gay culture. Again, for me, I think about it as I love that diversity and I love bringing it to the table. And then whenever you get people in a room, no matter what color they are and whether their hair is curly or straight, we're going to have drama.
Mhm.
And so I'm just curious as to, do you guys think, I think you do, the same way, is that it's okay to have that distinction of your own culture, of your own folks or your own people.
And I think it is. And that's one thing I appreciated about being in the corporate sector is that we had employee resource groups, that if were an African American, you could be a part of the BOLD, the Black Organization for Leadership Development, or if you wanted to learn more about the Black Organization for Leadership Development and you were Latino or you were not Black, but you could join that group to learn more about Blacks, or you could join Aspire to learn more about Asian groups. You could join any group you wanted to, but it created a forum for people to be okay, to be unapologetically who they are, right? And to learn how to intertwine that into the organization and show more appreciation and have more understanding about our differences, right? that's what we want, to create a more inclusive environment.
So we talked about intentional, create the forum, and then come in open for people to be themselves. How about you, Cindy? How would you answer that same question?
Well, some of what I did with my prior organization, we were always looking for a reason to have a party or to eat. So we were always celebrating, looking for a reason, and we would celebrate various holidays based on different ethnicities. I did not have an Asian in my group, but we celebrated Chinese New Year just so that we could talk about, okay, you know, you're the year of the rat, and do these characteristics truly fit you? Oh, yes, they do. And, you know, really engage them to talk about their differences and realize just how much alike we really are. So, you know, and like you, Tommy, you know, we have opportunities for the employees to be able to be engaged in other parts of the organization to support, you know, the Black area, the Latina. So, but sometimes one needs to be careful, and I think it's going to segue into our next area of discussion is, you know, I believe that our organization was very genuine when they created these various arms, but some folks can sometimes feel that they're being asked so that they can be a token, so that they can be the face of you know, being Latina or being African American, and that was normally something that the individual is feeling, not necessarily the intention of the organization.
So that does lead us into our second topic, which is tokenism. And again, from our conversations with Tommy, um, since she has retired from where she was before, at one time in her life, she shared with us, she was number 76. And she was included in a club that she didn't know existed. So Tommy, can you talk about what number 76 means?
Number 76, I realized when at one point when I was promoted to senior vice president, and in the corporate sector, there were thousands of senior vice presidents. But I realized when I got that nomination for senior vice president, I was number 76, which meant I was a 76th African American person who had become a senior vice president, which was like 0.03% of the senior vice presidents in that organization.
Because this organization had over 100,000 employees.
Right, and then in that part, probably 40,000 employees. And also I realized that there was kind of like an underground communication going on with the Blacks in the organization, because when I got that nomination and became number 76, I started getting all these emails, congratulations, you're number 76. And I'm like, wow, it was an awareness, it was a concern, but then it became like a real responsibility for me too, to continue to amplify and use my voice and to continue to represent, because there were so few. And I was glad to see before I left that there was a real effort and more intentional, we use that word a lot, more intentional programs and training to really focus on diversity, and not making that number such I was surprised by it. And so being more transparent about that number and being more transparent about the strategy to make sure that we hire more people of color. That
And
was
that's where, going back to what you said, making sure you had a diverse slate to choose from so you could honestly, hand on heart, say, I'm hiring the best person and we are creating diversity
right.
within our groups. And then after that, and I'd like for you to, I know you spoke about it last time, but I'd like for you to speak about the equal access, because you actually had someone on your team who felt that they didn't have equal access. So you were able to diversify, and then the next level you had to do was make sure you had equal access to you.
Right. And that's what happens when we don't see people that look like us. And that's why I say we need to see color. And this employee made me really see that I needed to see color and I needed to be more aware. The example I shared the last time was that because I had more African American employees and managers, these were managers reporting to me, they would come in my office, they would sit down, casually have conversations. And one of my managers, who happened to be Asian, she didn't come in. She didn't come in. She didn't sit down. But I would seek feedback, and I did get feedback that if you're not Black, you can't come in my office.
Mhm.
And so I immediately could narrow it down to one or two people, and I would have those one-on-one discussions. And she did admit that she had put that in my feedback, and I wanted to understand what that meant. And she said that the Black managers just come in and they just sit down and they just start talking and they're very comfortable. And I don't feel like I can do that. And I'm like, what makes you feel like you can't do that? Because you can't, it just so happens that the others are Black, but anybody on my team, I come from a family of 12. So that's my mantra. I come from a family of 12, the more the merrier. I'm sorry if I've done anything to cause that perception, but what can we do to, change it? And I tell the story that 10 years later, this manager is no longer reporting to me, but she comes in my office one day and she plops down in a chair. She throws her legs across the chair and she just starts talking to me. And I look at her and I'm like, look at you. And she's like, what? I'm like, look at you. And she's like, what? I'm like, look how comfortable you are. I said, you just came in here. We didn't have an appointment. And you're so comfortable. You've come in here and you've thrown your legs across the chair and we're talking. And that's what we want to be. I wanted her to show up as her authentic self and be comfortable with it. And that was a wonderful moment for me.
Yeah. And so then being number 76, did you feel like because you were 76, there was more responsibility on you to make sure you didn't screw it up, if you will, for other people?
Yeah, I felt that before I was number 76.
Okay.
And when Cindy brought up like the tokenism, tokenism is something I've felt like I've dealt with earlier. I've been in management and been in management for 30 years. And when I was a new leader, I resented feeling like a token or being asked to show up. When I was a nonprofit, I was asked to not go to a funeral for an employee that had passed away that I felt very dearly about, so that I could go to a meeting with a senior leader who was meeting with a Black congressperson. Knew nothing about the meeting, had not been at the table for the discussions, but was called at 6 a.m. in the morning and said, hey, need you not to go to that funeral, I need you to show up at the table because we want to have some diversity at the table. I resented that. But as I continued to mature in my leadership role, there were things that I was asked to do, and I felt like I was asked because I was Black and they needed Black representation, but it gave me a platform. And I had to start seeing it as an opportunity for me to grow and an opportunity for me to create growth opportunities for other people of color. So I stopped resenting it and I started looking at, okay, what can I learn from this? And what can I give back? And how can I show up?
Perfect. Thank you. So you did some internal work. Cindy, you were going to say something, and then we want to find one more thing.
Yes, one more thing. What I wanted to say was that as leaders, we really need to be aware. We're just going day to day, doing our thing, taking care of business, getting jobs done. And we really need to have an awareness and a connection with all of our people so that we can have a sense as to, am I including them? Am I having a conversation? Do I always talk to the same people all the time just because they're the extroverts? Or, of course, we don't have any favorites, but to make sure that you're spreading yourself really across all of your organization and giving them the time. And when there's an opportunity, usually if it was an opportunity to be a face somewhere, it wasn't because of the color of their skin. It was because they wanted to include the new hire. They wanted to include and promote and engage this individual with the rest of the organization. However, the individual had in the back of their mind, I don't know, is it just because I'm Puerto Rican? Is it just because I'm Black? Why are they asking me to do this? And having an awareness about that and being able to talk through that and have that conversation with your employee is really critical, because you don't want them to feel like a token. You don't want them to feel, clearly there are times that it really is a token situation, and shame on us if that's what we're doing. But just having an awareness and really being connected with your people, that's the name of the game here.
Yes, exactly. So with that, Cindy, you were going to ask Tommy and me a question.
Yeah, so I know we've talked before that Sue, years ago, you worked with Tommy's team. And at the time, Tommy's team was primarily all Black. Only just in the last, I don't know, a couple of weeks that we've been talking, you guys finally discussed the scenario, right? The scenario where Sue's coming into this all Black team, and you know, kind of what was that like? What was the dynamics like? Because here she is, white girl or Asian girl, half and half, and she's coming into what is a very strong, powerful group of women that they needed to work through some issues. So I guess, Sue, you know, you're the odd man out coming into this close-knit group. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so, and Tommy will explain the other side of it, but we were surprised, Tommy and I were both surprised that, wow, we never really like talked about what was secretly going on inside of our heads. And again, this is why we're having these conversations, because we need to have the conversations of the secret things that are going on inside of our heads, because that's what drives our behavior. It drives our comfort. And so when I went in, you know, of course I see distinction, and I had my own stereotype: Black, strong women, they'll eat you for lunch. And, you know, so don't piss them off. I.e., angry Black woman, right? I would never dare say that out loud. And then being the facilitator, am I going to be a good facilitator? Yes, there were, as with any team, there were interpersonal issues on the team. Would I fit in? Because I felt that I didn't understand that culture well enough. Then would I be a good facilitator? Because I didn't fully understand the culture, even though Cindy and I went to a school where we were the minorities and you know, had that experience in terms of races, you know, the color of our skin, where there were many more African American and Latinos or Latinas, because it was an all-girl high school. I really was insecure, you know, and I sort of joked about it. I teach this stuff about being confident. I was insecure going in because I was seeing Tommy's team as a they, right? And so when I shared that with Tommy, you know, she then shared what the secret things that were going on her side.
Right. And thank you for being so transparent, Sue. And we had worked with Sue and Barry, who's Sue's husband, and I think he's on. Hey, Barry. And Barry is an extrovert, right? And these are some things that get into biases too, right? Extroverts versus introverts. We'd work with Barry. We love Barry. Barry's a huge extrovert. I don't think he was intimidated at all with the they. Just jumped right in. And then when we were having our follow-up session and Sue was coming in, we knew that she was an introvert, right? And my team, predominantly extroverts, right? And asking, you know, well, is she going to be like Barry? And I'm like, no, she's not going to be like Barry. She's going to be like Sue. Well, you know, are we going to have to shift how we act, you know, because she's, you know, so introverted and she's a woman, we're women. I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. I mean, and I really believe that because I'd had conversations with Sue. And what Sue brought to the team, being an introvert with a team, and it wasn't all extroverts, but 90% extroverts, her ability to listen and then paraphrase or regurgitate what we were saying and really get us to stop and listen and think about it was so powerful. I mean, at the end of that session, we were singing together, which I don't think Sue had ever sung with a team before. Everybody wanted to get her a gift, and we wanted to send her something personalized just to let her know how introspective and how much we had gotten out of that session. But I think during that time, we all had to put our hands in and say, okay, we're going to trust the process and we're going to trust each other. And we learned a lot about each other, and we were able to get a lot of productivity and changes through that period. And Sue and I have maintained a relationship for years now.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
So
There is a question, Sue.
yeah, I saw that,
Okay.
that, you know, how can we help staff members who, a few are BIPOC on the team, not feel like they are responsible for representing or feeling singled out when it comes to diversity, equity, or inclusion? You know, of course, they need more diversity, but while we're building toward that, how do we keep people from having the token experience? And one of the things that we've all learned, and certainly I learned working with Tommy's team, is that we have to drop the, you know, yes, we have our culture and we have our ways and we have our nature, and we have to come into it as human beings and talk about what we struggle with. We often like to say as facilitators, Tommy, Cindy, and I, that you have to put the issue that creates uncomfort and distrust on the table. And that's an important thing to do. And it's not easy because it's an uncomfortable, yucky thing to say. So that's why, you know, part of our offer is if you want help having these discussions, as you can tell, we get enjoyment out of it and we know it's not easy, but there are ways to open up a discussion about tokenism and having that experience and what that's like. And when we do that, we then start to relate to each other as human to human, and each of us has that uniqueness of the beauty of their color or the beauty of their style or the beauty that the fact that they are BIPOC or, you know, all of that stuff. Because now we're getting down to the real thing that drives us, which is our humanness.
Yes.
And we see that Barry, thank you, Barry, shared with all the attendees an experience he had that, you know, where about racism, and when he was in high school and going to high school, which was typically WASPy. I even forgot about that term, but yeah, the WASPy, if you don't know that, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant groups, a great way to say white people. And, you know, and having primarily a WASP type organization or school that you went to, so you don't even realize that unconscious bias is being programmed in, right? And that's why it's called unconscious bias. So with that, we've only got, as you can tell, we just touched the surface. We'd love to help you guys if you want to have these kinds of conversations, because it begins with awareness. It's important to understand distinction. It's important to value those differences. You know, it's important to not be colorblind, and then again, somewhat be colorblind, right? But we become colorblind when we recognize Tommy as Tommy with all of her distinction. And Tommy recognizes me in all of my distinction. And I recognize Cindy and Cindy recognizes me. You know, it's exactly what Tommy said before, by not being colorblind, did I see her? Do we see each other? And that is where it comes to psychological safety, vulnerability, inclusion, and belonging. So the very first step is awareness. One of the things one of our recent clients, Cindy and I were talking to, is they said, we're looking around the table. First, there's no women. We all look alike. And even though we've been trying to hire for diversity, there's no diversity. And yet at the contributor level of our organization, it's close to 40%. What's happening where there are distinctive, if you will, color differences and male gender differences. So what Cindy was saying is being purposeful. Tommy, what you were saying, being purposeful, intentional, recognize that we don't have distinction. And somehow we become colorblind without, we don't have to beat ourselves up, but we better take ourselves and become accountable for what goes forward from here. And then the second thing is that as we become intentional about how we hire and who we bring in and who is making sure that we have equal access. Tommy's story, this woman felt like she didn't have equal access. And what did she do? She invited her in. And as leaders, it takes a lot of work. We've got to invite people in. Tommy also talked last time about on her, in her office, she had a message to herself, who have I included? Who have I excluded? And then she became intentional about inviting people in. The other thing that's really important is then you have to have the bravery, like what Barry was sharing in his comments in the chat, is you have to have bravery to speak up when you see the distinctions and there's discrimination going on. And then as a leader, we have to make sure that we provide that safety so that they can come in, that we can actually talk about it. And that's where the intentional drive for change comes in and takes action. It's like, it's not enough to just understand and awareness anymore. It's now we have to take the action. And so one of the things that we've been learning about, and we've been having some of these conversations, and it comes out under the guise of favoritism. And what we're really realizing is it's not just diversity. It's this equal access and giving people equal opportunity. And the teams are now challenging themselves, going, wait, we're not, going back to Tommy's question, including everybody. And because we know we can trust this person that we trust, then we're not developing the people who we are excluding, which then automatically begins an unconscious discriminatory practice. Because I keep going to the one I trust, and oftentimes they look like us. And then I'm not, as a leader, developing the other ones so that they can have equal access. So it's asking the question, where have I done that? What can I change? And then actually changing it. And so, what we've been doing with our real leadership assessment and our cultural fitness assessment is that we have that kind of stuff embedded. And then, if you will, our claim to fame is making sure we have these real talks, these real conversations. Because when everybody drops that pretense, oh my God, I'm going into a team of all Black women. Oh my God, it's Sue coming in and she's not like Barry. And we just sort of, okay, hang on. They're people. I be a people too. All right, let's start there. Then we start to open up, be vulnerable, and have those conversations. So as I said before, if you would like, please put it into the chat box. If you would like to have the conversation about where you can start and to have these deeper conversations and to start your diversity process. We don't do the part around creating a program for diversity, but we are all about raising the consciousness around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, Cindy, anything else you'd like to say? Tommy, anything else?
No, I appreciate getting the opportunity to, talk out loud and, really look into myself as to, do I really have unconscious bias? Because I've really been working hard at not having that bias. And I still feel a little prickly about it. But at the end of the day, my tip is just treat others the way you want to be treated, and you can't go wrong.
And I agree with you, Cindy. We're not perfect, but we can always strive to do better. We can educate ourselves and we can have the dialogue. I think that's where people fail most of the time. It's just having an open door and having the dialogue. So I would encourage everyone to start there and then just be very self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So if you would like to have that discussion with Tommy, Cindy, or I, just put yes in the the chat right now, and we will reach back out to you, or, email us at info@lcbgroup.com, and we will be happy to talk to you about how do you start to have these kinds of real talks inside of your organization. So thank you very much. Appreciate the comments and the sharing and the questions, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.